Under the scorching sun of the Arizona desert, silence stretched for miles, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk and the soft whisper of wind sweeping across dry brush. The land was harsh and endless, where the earth cracked beneath one's feet, and the mountains stood like sleeping giants watching over forgotten souls. For years no one had dared to cross that stretch of land. The abandoned ranch stood in the middle of it, half buried in dust and memories. The adobe walls were cracked, the wooden beams eaten by time, and the wide porch sagged under the weight of years. Yet that afternoon, a shadow moved across its broken gate. It was not the wind, nor a coyote. It was a man bare-chested, sunburned, his dark hair tied behind his head with a strip of hide, and his eyes sharp like the blade of a hunting knife. He was Apache. He had come far, traveling through canyons and dry riverbeds, leaving no tracks behind. To anyone who might have seen him, he was a ghost from the old wars. One of the last of his kind who refused to live penned in a reservation. The soldiers called him outlaw. His people once called him warrior, but now he called himself nothing. For many seasons he had wandered the desert, guided by a pain he never spoke of. That day he had not meant to come to the ranch. He was simply searching for water, or maybe a place to rest before the night swallowed the desert. But when he saw the crumbling house standing lonely against the horizon, he felt something stir inside him. It was as if the wind itself whispered for him to go there. He walked slowly through the courtyard, stepping over broken tiles and old wagon parts. The once white walls were faded to the color of sand. Vultures circled above, and a single door creaked open, as if welcoming him. Inside, the air was still and heavy with dust. His moccasins brushed across the floor, raising tiny clouds that hung in the shafts of sunlight pouring through holes in the roof. He saw the remains of a life that once was an overturned chair, a cracked lamp, a child's shoe half buried in dirt. Everything spoke of people who had left in a hurry, leaving behind their laughter and fear. The Apache's breath slowed as he studied the room. He could sense what others could not, the echo of things that had happened long ago. His tribe believed places remembered pain, and this house had plenty of it. He could almost hear the faint sound of a woman crying, the slam of boots against the floorboards, the far-off neighing of a horse. Yet the only sound now was the wind moaning through the gaps in the walls. He made his way deeper inside. A stairway led upward, its railing worn smooth by hands long gone. He paused halfway, listening. Somewhere above, something tapped lightly, like a loose shutter beating in the wind. The feeling of being watched crawled up his spine, but he did not turn back. He had faced rifles and raids before. Ghosts did not scare him. What frightened him was the thought of the past, its own and the one buried here. The upper room had a wide window overlooking the desert. The light fell across a table layered with dust and papers. He brushed them aside and saw a small frame lying face down. It was old, its glass cracked. When he turned it over, he froze. It was a photograph faded, nearly forgotten by time. But the faces in it were clear enough to make his heart stop. A man stood beside a woman holding a small child. The man wore a soldier's coat, his eyes proud, his hand resting on the woman's shoulder. She was fair-haired, with a calm smile that seemed both sad and kind. The child's face, though blurred, looked no older than 3. What shook him most wasn't the image of them. It was what hung from the woman's neck. A small beaded necklace with a carved symbol, one only the Apache made. He knew that design. He had carved one just like it many years ago. He dropped the photo as if it burned. His chest tightened. The room seemed to close in around him. That necklace belonged to his mother, one she had lost when soldiers raided their camp. He remembered the night of fire and screaming, how he had been dragged away as a boy. That was the last time he saw her. For years he had believed she was dead. But here, in the heart of an abandoned ranch, her necklace hung around the neck of a white woman smiling beside a soldier. Nothing made sense. His breath grew heavy, his fingers trembling as he lifted the frame again, staring closer, searching for answers the photo could not give. Who were these people? Why was his mother's necklace here, miles from any Apache camp? Had she been taken? Or had she given it willingly? His mind battled with questions, each one sharper than the last. Outside, thunder rumbled far away, though the sky was clear. The land seemed to hold its breath, waiting. He felt the old rage rise in him, the same that once drove him to fight against those who had destroyed his world. But now, there was something else beneath it, a need to know. To uncover what had really happened, he searched the room again, tossing aside torn curtains and broken drawers. Behind the bed, he found a small chest, half buried in dust. Its lock was rusted, but with a strong pull, it gave way. Inside were letters tied with faded blue ribbon, and a few trinkets, a locket, a dried rose. A piece of cloth embroidered with strange symbols. He unfolded one letter carefully. The ink was nearly gone, but he could still make out words. "He saved her life," it began. She was not one of them anymore. The rest of the lines were smeared, but one sentence stood out clearly. "The child carries her eyes but his blood." His pulse pounded in his ears. The words hit him like a blow. Could it mean what he feared? That the woman in the picture had once been Apache's mother, and that she had borne another child here, far from the tribe? He stared again at the child's faint outline in the photograph. The small face, the slight curve of the lips, it was almost like looking at his own reflection from years ago. A strange chill ran through him, though the air was hot. For a long moment he stood silent, listening to the whispering wind. Somewhere outside, a door creaked, as if pushed by unseen hands. He took the photo and the letter and tucked them into his pouch. He didn't know what he would find if he stayed, but something inside him told him he had stumbled upon more than an abandoned ranch. He stepped outside and scanned the horizon. The sun was sinking behind the mountains, painting the sky with streaks of red and gold. The land looked peaceful, yet under that calm stretched a shadow older than time. He felt it in his bones. The truth buried here would not rest quietly far in the distance. He saw dust rising like riders approaching. Maybe they were soldiers, or maybe just wanderers like himself. But something told him they were coming for this place, and maybe for what he had just found. He gripped the handle of his knife, feeling the weight of the photo against his chest. He didn't understand why fate had brought him here, but he knew one thing for certain. The past he had been running from was waiting for him inside that photograph. And as the last light faded from the sky, he turned back to the house, where shadows moved across the broken windows. He didn't know whether they were ghosts or memories, but he was about to find out. The wind picked up as night fell over the desert, sweeping fine dust through the cracks of the old ranch. The Apache stayed near the doorway, watching how the shadows stretched long across the ground. The air had turned cool, carrying the faint smell of rain from far away. He had built many fires in his life, but that night he dared not light one. Something about the place felt alive, as if it breathed when the sun went down. The silence was heavy, thick enough to feel against his skin. He rested his hand on the knife at his belt, not out of fear, but instinct. His mind kept circling back to the photograph. That smile, that necklace, every part of it pressed against his chest like a weight. He remembered his mother as she was before the raid, her hair braided with red thread, her soft singing by the fire, the way she touched his cheek and told him to be strong. He had been 8 summers old when soldiers stormed their camp near the river. The night was full of gunfire and screams. He remembered hiding under a wagon, clutching a small carving of a hawk his father had given him. When the flames died, most of his people were gone, and the ones who survived were scattered. He had carried that carving with him for years, until he lost it too. But the symbol carved into the necklace in the photograph is the same as the one his father used to make a hawk with its wings spread, the mark of their family line. He walked through the yard and stopped by a dry water trough. The boards were cracked, and scorpions crawled under the edge. The moonlight painted everything silver. He looked toward the hills where his people once roamed free. The world had changed. The white man had built roads, towns, and churches where sacred grounds once stood. The Apache were driven to live behind fences, and those who refused were hunted down. He was one of the last who chose the open desert instead of a cage. He knelt, touching the sand. A trail of hoofprints led toward the west, half covered by wind. They looked fresh. Whoever had come here before him might not have left long ago. He He followed the prints until they disappeared into the brush, then turned back toward the ranch. The night was too still. Not even a coyote called. When he reached the porch again, he saw something strange. A light flickered through one of the windows, faint like a dying candle. He froze, every muscle tense. He had checked the house. There had been no one there. Yet now, there it was again, that glow moving slowly across the room. He stepped inside, silent as shadow. The light vanished, leaving only the smell of smoke in the air. He waited in the dark, listening. Then a sound came, a soft creak, as if someone was walking upstairs. He moved carefully, the boards whispering beneath his feet. The photograph and letter still rested in his pouch, close to his chest. When he reached the top, the sound stopped. He stood still, watching the moonlight spill across the floor through the broken roof. Then from behind him, a whisper carried through the air. It was faint, almost lost to the wind, but clear enough to make his skin prickle. A woman's voice saying something he could not understand. He turned quickly, but there was no one there, only the photograph lying on the table where he had left it. Except now, the frame had been turned upright again. The glass caught the moonlight, glinting like an eye. He felt the pull of the past stronger than ever. His people believed the spirits of the lost could linger when their stories were unfinished. Maybe this place held one such spirit. Or maybe it was trying to show him something he wasn't ready to see. He picked up the photograph again. This time his eyes fell on the background. Behind the family stood a building long and low with arches. It was the very ranch he was standing in now. It's the same broken archway, the same tower. That meant the photo had been taken here. His heart pounded harder. Whoever that woman was, she had lived in this place, maybe even died here. He set the picture down and searched the room again, more carefully this time. Under a loose floorboard, he found another small object wrapped in cloth. Inside it was a medal, tarnished with age, with an eagle engraved on it, the kind given to soldiers. On the back, faint letters were still visible. He wiped the dirt away and read the name. He didn't know it, but he repeated it under his breath, as if saying it would summon its story. The next morning, sunlight poured across the land like fire. He sat on the porch, sharpening his knife and thinking about the name. Somewhere in the world, maybe in one of the forts or towns, there might still be someone who knew it. Someone who could tell him why his mother's necklace had ended up here. But going there would mean risk. He was not welcome among settlers. They saw him as savage, no matter the years that had passed. He had learned to move unseen, to vanish before trouble came. Yet this time, he couldn't just walk away. Something inside him demanded answers. He left the ranch before the heat rose, heading toward the nearest town. It was a day's walk through open land. He carried little: his knife, a water pouch, the photograph, and the letter. As he walked, the land seemed to whisper its old songs, the wind carrying voices only he could hear. When he reached the old road, he saw wagon tracks and fresh horse prints. A vulture circled overhead, its shadow gliding across the ground. By noon, the town appeared in the distance, small, dusty, and quiet, like most frontier places that had seen better days. He pulled his hat lower and walked in through the back alleyways. Children playing near a water trough stopped and stared at him, then ran to call for their mothers. He felt the old eyes watching him from porches and windows. Some men paused with their hands near their belts, suspicion written on their faces. He kept his gaze low, heading toward the general store. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and tobacco. The shopkeeper, an older man with gray whiskers, looked up sharply. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his voice guarded. The Apache reached into his pouch and pulled out the photograph.
"Oh."
"You've seen this place?" he asked quietly, laying it on the counter. The man leaned closer, adjusting his spectacles. "That's the old Mission Ranch," he said. "Been empty near 15 years. Belonged to a soldier and his wife once. Tragic story, that one. Folks say they vanished one night, left everything behind. Some say raiders got him. Others say they just disappeared." "Why are you asking?" The Apache didn't answer right away. He studied the man's face, trying to tell if he spoke truth or rumor. "You know their names?" Shopkeeper scratched his chin. "I remember the man's name was Captain Warren or something close. Fought in the Indian Wars down south. His wife was quiet, never came into town much. Pretty woman, though. Pale hair, blue eyes. Yeah, people said she wasn't from around here. Why? He picked up the photo again, his hand trembling just slightly. You ever see her wear something like this? He asked, pointing to the small necklace visible in the picture. The shopkeeper squinted. Hard to say. Looks like beads. Maybe Indian work. Then he looked at the stranger more closely. Why are you so interested? The Apache's jaw tightened. 'Cause I know that necklace, he said softly. It belonged to someone who was taken from my people. The shopkeeper frowned, glancing nervously toward the door. You best be careful talking like that around here. Folks don't like stirring up old ghosts. The captain's old friends still come through sometimes. Rangers. Men who think the past ought to stay buried. The Apache nodded, sliding the photo back into his pouch. Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried, he said. He left the store and stood in the street, the heat pressing down on him like a weight. Across the road, a man in a long coat leaned against a post, watching him. Their eyes met for a moment before the man looked away, pretending to roll a cigarette. The Apache knew that Lakit was the kind that followed him everywhere he went, half suspicion, half warning. He turned toward the edge of town, planning to head back before sundown. But as he passed the saloon, he heard voices inside. Found that old place again, one man was saying. The Mission Ranch. Saw smoke out there last night. Thought it was just the wind, but maybe someone's hiding there. Another voice answered, lower but sharper. If it's who I think it is, we'll handle it. That land still belongs to the captain's name, even if he's gone. The Apache stopped, the hair on the back of his neck rising. They were talking about the ranch. Maybe they already knew someone had been there. He backed away quietly and slipped down the alley. The sun was already sinking low, painting the town in red light. He had planned to find answers, but now he had stirred something else. Whoever those men were, they meant to go to that ranch, and, if they did, they would find him. He walked back toward the open land, his steps quick and silent. The desert stretched. Before him, like an old scar, and behind him, the town faded into dusk. The photograph rested heavy in his pouch, and the truth he had begun to uncover felt darker with each mile. Somewhere in that ruined house lay the rest of the story, and before the night was over, he knew he would have to face it. By the time the Apache reached the edge of the desert again, night had already swallowed the horizon. The moon rose pale and full, casting long shadows across the sand. He moved fast, silent, keeping close to the low ridges where the wind couldn't carry his steps. The town behind him had stirred old memories and new danger. He could still hear the words from the saloon echoing in his head, men talking about the Mission Ranch. It's about smoke, about someone hiding there. They were coming, and whatever secrets that place held, they would not let them stay buried. The wind grew colder as he drew near the ranch. The building loomed in the moonlight like a skeleton of stone. A faint sound came from inside, the soft clatter of something falling. He gripped his knife and stepped through the doorway, every sense alert. The shadows stretched and shifted, playing tricks on his eyes. Then, from one of the back rooms, came a cough-a-weak human sound. He turned quickly, ready for a fight. But instead of a gun or blade, he saw a small figure crouched behind a broken table. It was a boy, no older than 12, his clothes torn, his face streaked with dirt. The boy froze when he saw him. "Don't hurt me," he whispered. The Apache lowered his knife slightly, but didn't step closer. "Who are you?" The boy hesitated. "My name's Luke. I didn't mean to be here. I was just looking for a place to sleep. I got lost." "Lost," the Apache repeated, his voice quiet but sharp. "You came all the way out here alone." The boy nodded quickly. "My uncle sent me to find cattle that ran off near the hills. I thought I could take a shortcut. Then it got dark, and I saw this place. I didn't know anyone was here." The Apache studied him carefully. The boy looked frightened but honest. His hands were trembling and he had no weapon. "You shouldn't stay here," the Apache said. "Men are coming. Bad men." The boy's eyes widened. "Are you running from them?" The Apache didn't answer right away. "They're not looking for me. They're looking for something that belongs here." He walked to the window and looked out across the desert. The sky was clear, but far off. He thought he saw a flicker of movement. Triders, maybe. "You'll leave before dawn," he said. The boy hesitated, then stepped forward. "If they're bad men, maybe we should hide together. I can help." He looked at the boy, surprised by his courage. "Help how?" "I know the land," the boy said. "My PA used to trade horses near here. There's a dry well behind the barn. No one would think to look there." The Apache considered it for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Show me." They stepped out into the cool night. The boy led him behind the barn, where the ground had cracked from years of sun. A circle of stones marked the old well. When they pulled aside the cover, a hollow space yawned below, deep enough to hide one man, maybe two. "You've got good eyes," the Apache said. Luke smiled weakly. "Pa used to say the same." The Apache looked at him again, feeling something stir inside, a faint memory of another boy long ago, is hiding from soldiers under burning wagons. He had been that boy once. Now he was the one being hunted. They went back inside, where he built a small fire, just enough to warm their hands. The boy spoke again, his voice small. "Were you a soldier too?" "No," he said quietly. "I was the one they fought against." The boy looked down, uncertain. "My PA said the war's over. For you, maybe," the Apache said. "Not for those who lost everything." The boy didn't reply. After a moment, he pulled something from his pocket, a small wooden carving of a hawk. The Apache's breath caught when he saw it. "Where did you get that?" "My uncle gave it to me," Luke said. "Said it came from an old friend long ago." "Why?" The Apache reached out, his hand trembling slightly. The carving was almost identical to the one he had lost as a child. The same wings, the same small markings on the tail. "That carving belongs to my people," he said. "Your uncle, what's his name?" The boy hesitated. "Warren," he said. "Jacob Warren. He used to be a captain in the army." The Apache's eyes darkened. That was the name from the medal he had found. His pulse quickened, and for a moment the world seemed to tilt. "Where is he now?" The boy looked frightened by the change in his tone. "He lives east near the river. He's been sick for a while." "Why? Did you know him?" The Apache turned away, staring into the fire. The captain's name, the ranch, the necklace, it all tied together now. The man who once fought his people had lived here, married a woman who wore an Apache necklace, and raised a child in this very house. But why had they disappeared? What had happened to them? What part did the captain's brother Jacob play in all this? The sound of horses broke the silence. The Apache's head snapped up. Outside, dust rose in the moonlight. The riders had come. He pushed the fire out with his boot. "Get down," he whispered. The boy crawled behind the old counter, while the Apache moved to the door. 4 riders approached the house, their lanterns glowing like fireflies. The Apache recognized the man leading them, the one from the saloon who had been watching him. They dismounted and spread out. "Stay quiet," the Apache whispered to the boy. The first man stepped onto the porch, pushing the door open with the barrel of his rifle. "I know you're in here," he called out. "You think you can hide in the captain's old place? You've got something that belongs to us." The Apache stayed still, his hand resting on his knife. The man took another step. "We found your tracks from town. You should have kept walking, friend," motioned to one of the others. "Search the barn." The second man disappeared outside while the others stayed near the doorway. The Apache's eyes flicked toward the boy, who was pressed against the wall, wide-eyed. Then, as one of the men turned his back, the Apache moved. Fast and silent, he swept forward, knocking the rifle aside and striking the man's wrist. The weapon clattered to the floor. The others spun around shouting, but by the time they raised their guns, he had already melted into the shadows. A shot rang out, splintering the doorframe. The boy screamed and the echo filled the room. "Fan out," the leader barked. "He's in here somewhere." The Apache slipped through the back door and circled around. The night was full of dust and panic. He could hear the men cursing as they stumbled through the dark. He reached the barn, grabbing a rope and pulling down a beam. The roof groaned and then collapsed with a crash, sending up a storm of dirt. The riders shouted and ran toward the sound, giving him just enough time to slip back into the house. "Come," he whispered to the boy. They ran to the old well, lowering themselves down into the hollow space. Above them, footsteps pounded across the yard. The leader's voice rose again. Spread out. Check the house, the barn, everywhere. He's got something of the captain's, I know it. The boy looked at him in the dim light. What do they want? Truth, the Apache said. The kind that kills men. The footsteps moved farther away, and for a while only the sound of wind filled the air. The boy shivered beside him. Will they come back? Yes, he said quietly. They won't stop until they find what's hidden here. As the night stretched on, the boy fell asleep, his head resting against the stone wall. The Apache stayed awake, staring up at the small opening above them. His thoughts drifted between anger and confusion. What had the captain done that these men wanted to keep buried? Why did the woman in the photograph wear his mother's necklace? And what if the boy beside him carried blood that tied both worlds together, the soldiers and the Apaches? When dawn finally came, the riders were gone, but their tracks were fresh and clear. The Apache climbed out of the well and watched the sun rise over the desert. The light fell on the old ranch, revealing new details, the faint carving above the doorway. A small hawk symbol weathered by time. It matched the one on his father's carvings. This place wasn't just a ranch. It was built on the ruins of something older, something that connected his people to this land before the settlers came. He turned to the boy. We go east, he said. To find your uncle? The boy rubbed his eyes. Why? He doesn't know you. You will, the Apache said. And he'll tell me what happened here. As they packed what little they had, the wind shifted again, carrying a faint echo, a woman's voice calling, soft but clear. It came from inside the house. He turned toward the sound and saw the curtain flutter, though there was no wind. The photograph he had left on the table now lay on the floor, face down. He picked it up and turned it over. The image had changed. The woman was still there, but now the child's face was clearer. Older, and it looked almost exactly like the boy standing beside him. The morning light spread across the desert in streaks of gold, and the Apache stood at the edge of the ranch with the photograph in his hand, staring at it in silence. The child in the picture, once blurred by time, now seemed alive, clearer than before, as if the years between them had thinned. He looked from the photograph to the boy standing beside him. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same eyes, the same curve of the mouth. The discovery left his thoughts tangled. Was it some trick of fate? Or had the past truly found its way into the present? The boy, still drowsy from sleep, kicked at the sand and looked up at him. What's wrong? He asked softly. The Apache slipped the photo back into his pouch. Nothing that time won't show, he said. We must go before those men return. They set out east, toward the river where the boy said his uncle lived. The land between was rough and open, filled with dry arroyos and twisted brush. The heat rose quickly, shimmering above the rocks. They walked in silence, both carrying the weight of questions they couldn't yet ask. Around midday, they stopped under a patch of mesquite. The boy shared a small piece of bread from his pocket, while the Apache drank from the last of their water. Why are those men after you? The boy asked after a while. They're not after me, the Apache said quietly. They're after what the ranch hides. But what's there? Something they fear. Something that tells the truth about the captain. The boy frowned. You mean my uncle's brother? He nodded slowly. If your uncle is Jacob Warren, think his brother was the man in that picture. It's the one who lived at the Mission Ranch, and I think that woman beside him wasn't from his world at all. She wore the mark of my people. The boy looked confused. You think she was? Your kin? He didn't answer, only stared at the distant hills. The wind brushed across the sand, carrying the faint smell of rain. I don't know yet, he said at last, but I intend to find out. They continued walking until the sun began to fall behind the mountains. The river valley stretched below them, lined with cottonwoods and willows. Smoke rose from a small cabin near the water. The boy pointed toward it. That's where my uncle lives, he said. The Apache studied the scene carefully. A single horse grazed near the fence, and a man sat outside the cabin sharpening a tool. His shoulders were broad but bent with age. The Apache motioned for the boy to stay back while he approached quietly. When the man looked up, his eyes narrowed. "Who's there?" he called. "I come with the boy," the Apache said. "He found me in the desert." The man's face softened when he saw Luke. "You gave your aunt a fright, boy," he said, but his gaze soon shifted to the stranger beside him. "You don't look like one of us." "What brings you here?" The Apache stepped forward, calm but steady. "Questions," he said, "about your brother." The man's expression changed, a flicker of something like fear passing through his eyes. "My brother's been gone a long time. Ain't nothing left to ask about him." "Maybe," the Apache said, "but his story is not finished." He reached into his pouch and pulled out the photograph, holding it out. "This was taken at the Mission Ranch." Jacob's hand trembled as he took it. His eyes moved across the image, and his jaw tightened. "Where did you find this?" "In the ruins of your brother's home," the Apache said, "along with a letter. A letter that spoke of a woman who was not one of your kind." Jacob looked up sharply. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know enough," the Apache replied. "The necklace she wore belonged to my mother. I want to know why she was with your brother. I want to know what happened to her." The man's voice grew rough. "You think you can come here after all these years and dig up ghosts? Some things are better left buried." "I've buried enough," the Apache said. "I will not bury the truth." The boy looked between them, his face pale. "Uncle," he said, "he saved me. Those men in town, they said bad things. They're coming here." Jacob's head turned. "They followed you?" The Apache nodded. "They'll be here before dark." For a moment, no one spoke. The air was heavy, the sound of the river distant and low. Then Jacob sighed and rubbed his face. "Come inside," he said. "If they're coming, we'll need to talk fast." Inside the cabin, the walls were lined with old maps and fading photographs. A rifle hung above the door, and the smell of smoke filled the air. Jacob poured water into a tin cup and set it on the table. "You said the woman in that picture wore a necklace from your people," he said finally. "You're right. It was Apache. My brother found it years ago after a raid near the river. There was a woman hurt bad, but alive. He brought her here." The Apache's heart pounded. "She survived?" Jacob nodded slowly. "She didn't speak our language then, but she stayed. My brother protected her, even when the others called him a traitor. Over time, she learned to speak. They married quietly, raised a child, but the men he served with never forgave him for it. They said he'd gone soft, that he'd taken one of the enemy into his home." The Apache's hands clenched. "And what happened to them?" Jacob's voice lowered. "One night, riders came. They set fire to the ranch. My brother fought them off, but he and the woman disappeared in the smoke. The boy, no one ever found him. Folks said the Apaches took him back, but I always knew it wasn't true." He looked up slowly. "That boy, he'd be about your age now." The Apache's throat tightened. "You're saying I'm that child?" Jacob didn't answer, but his eyes said enough, before either could speak again. The sound of hoofbeats shattered the stillness. Horses thundered across the valley, and shouts echoed through the air. Jacob snatched the rifle from the wall. "They found us." The Apache moved to the window. Dust clouds rose as 6 riders approached, the same men from town. He recognized their leader, the one with the scar across his cheek. "They want the photo," the Apache said. "And the proof it carries." Jacob nodded grimly. "Then they'll have to go through us first." Luke clutched his uncle's arm. "What do they want with you?" "They want to erase the past," the Apache said. "They don't want the world to know that one of their own turned against them for love." The boy's eyes widened. "For love?" "Yes," Jacob said. "Your uncle's brother chose peace when others wanted war. That's what they could never forgive." The riders dismounted, spreading out in a half circle around the cabin. The scarred man called out, his voice sharp as a blade. "We know you're in there, Jacob. Hand over the Apache, and we'll let you live." Jacob cocked his rifle. "That's a lie, and you know it." The Apache looked toward the back of the cabin, scanning for a way out. The river lay beyond the fence, wide but shallow this time of year. "If we can reach the river, we can lose them," he said. They'll shoot us before we get there, Jacob replied. Not if we distract them. Jacob hesitated, then nodded. I'll hold them off. You take the boy and go. I'm not leaving you, the Apache said firmly. Jacob gave a faint smile. You've got your mother's fire. Go. I made my peace a long time ago. The Apache placed a hand on his shoulder. If you fall, I'll carry your story. Outside, the men advanced, rifles ready. Jacob fired first, the shot cracking across the valley. The horses reared, and chaos erupted. The Apache grabbed the boy's hand and darted out the back, racing through the brush toward the river. Bullets tore through the air, kicking up dirt around them. The boy stumbled, but the Apache pulled him up. Run, he shouted. They reached the riverbank, breathless. Behind them, the cabin was burning, smoke rising against the evening sky. The sound of gunfire echoed, then silence. The Apache's chest ached, but there was no time to look back. He pushed the boy into the shallow water, guiding him across as the last light faded. When they reached the far side, the Apache turned and looked one last time. The flames lit the valley like a second sunrise. He could see shadows moving among the smokemen, shouting, searching. Somewhere in that burning cabin lay the truth he had been chasing his whole life, and the man who had finally spoken it. The boy clung to his arm, trembling. What will we do now? The Apache looked at him, then at the distant mountains beyond the river. We go where the truth leads, he said, and we finish what they started. The night settled around them, filled with the hiss of wind and the glow of fire behind. The boy leaned against him, and for the first time in years, the Apache felt something stir inside, something that wasn't anger or grief. It was hope, faint but alive. And as the flames slowly faded into the dark, he knew the past was not finished yet. It was waiting just beyond the horizon, where the final truths and their fate would soon be revealed. The night stretched long over the desert as the Apache and the boy crossed the river. Their wet clothes clinging to their skin and the smell of smoke still heavy in the air. Behind them, the flames of the burning cabin slowly faded into embers, carried off by the wind. The stars above seemed brighter than ever, endless and watchful. The boy sat on the riverbank, breathing hard, his small hands shaking. The Apache knelt beside him, checking his arm for any cuts. There were none, only scratches from the brush. You did well, he said quietly. You were brave. The boy looked up at him, his voice trembling. What about my uncle? Did he, the Apache, put a hand on his shoulder? He stayed to protect the truth, he said softly. He knew what he was doing. He looked back toward the smoke rising on the horizon. His fight is not lost. He gave us time, and now we must make it mean something. The boy lowered his head, tears glinting in the moonlight. He was the only family I had left. You're not alone anymore, the Apache said. His voice was low but steady. We both carry the same story now. They rested until dawn, wrapped in silence and the sound of flowing water. When the first light of morning broke over the desert, the Apache stood and faced the east. The sun touched the cliffs and turned the sky to gold. For the first time in years, he didn't feel hunted or lost. The truth had found him, even if it came with pain. The woman in the photograph, the one who wore his mother's necklace, had not been a stranger after all. She was the bridge between two worlds, the proof that love could survive even in a land built on division by midday. They reached the edge of an old trading post. A few wagons stood outside, and smoke curled from a chimney. The Apache kept his hat low as they entered. Inside, an old woman sat behind the counter, her eyes sharp and curious. She looked up and studied him for a long moment before speaking. Haven't seen your kind around here in a long time, she said. I'm not here to cause trouble, he replied. I'm looking for someone who might have known Captain Warren and his family. The woman frowned, then nodded slowly. I remember them. Kind folks, though most didn't understand him. The woman, she wasn't from these parts. Some said she had Apache blood. She paused, her gaze softening. They were good people. What's it to you? They were my family, he said simply. The woman blinked, surprise flickering in her eyes. Then you've come a long way to find peace, haven't you? He nodded once. Too long. She went to the back and returned with a small box wrapped in cloth. A trader brought this years ago. Said it was found near the mission ranch after the fire. I kept it, thinking maybe someone would come for it. He unwrapped the box carefully. Inside was a small locket made of silver, engraved with the same hawk symbol he'd seen on his father's carvings. When he opened it, a folded scrap of paper fell into his palm. The writing was faded, but he could still read the words, "For our son." So he knows both sides of his heart belong to the same sky. The Apache closed the locket gently, his chest tightening with emotion. The boy leaned closer, staring at the tiny carving. "It's your family's mark," he whispered. He nodded. "It means freedom," he said quietly. "Freedom to walk between worlds." They stayed at the post for the night, resting and gathering supplies. The old woman made them stew and gave the boy a clean shirt. Before they left, she touched the Apache's arm. "You've carried sorrow long enough," she said kindly. "Now carry what they wanted for you life." As they set out again, the world seemed to open before them. The air was fresh after a night of light rain, and the desert smelled alive. The boy rode on a borrowed horse, while the Apache walked beside him, leading the way toward the distant mountains. They had no map, no plan, only the sense that something better lay ahead. As they traveled, the boy began to talk more. He told stories of his uncle's ranch days, the horses he'd trained, the way he used to whistle old tunes at sunset. The Apache listened quietly, feeling a strange comfort in the boy's words. It reminded him of his own youth, before the raids, before the loss. For the first time, the silence between them didn't feel heavy. It felt like belonging. When they reached a ridge overlooking the valley, the Apache stopped and looked down. The land stretched far and wide, golden grass, scattered cactus, and the river winding through it like a ribbon of silver. "This land was theirs," he said softly. "Your uncle's brother and my mother. They lived here because they believed there could be peace." The boy looked at him curiously. "Do you think there ever will be?" He took a slow breath, watching the wind move across the grass. "Peace doesn't come easy," he said. "But every time someone remembers, every time someone chooses not to hate, it begins again." They built a small camp there, near an old cottonwood tree. For several days they stayed, gathering wood, fishing from the river, and mending what they could. The boy's laughter began to return, and sometimes, when the light faded, the Apache would tell him stories of the old ways of the hawk spirit that guided lost souls home, the warriors who rode with the wind. The boy listened wide-eyed, repeating each word as if memorizing it. One evening, as the sun dropped low and painted the sky red, a shadow appeared across the plain. A single rider approached, carrying a white flag tied to his saddle. The Apache watched closely, ready for danger, but the man stopped at a distance and raised his hands. "Peace," he called out. "I come with no fight." When he rode closer, the Apache saw he wore an old uniform, worn and patched. His beard was gray, his eyes tired but honest. "I was one of them," the man said. "The ones who came after the captain. I didn't know what they did until it was too late. The others, they're gone now. The truth should be known." He handed the Apache a small folded paper sealed with wax. "This was written by your father before that night. He wanted you to have it." The Apache took the paper carefully. His hand shook as he opened it. The words were written in a strong hand. "If my son ever finds this, know that I loved your mother with all I had. I fought not against her people, but for her right to live free. I pray one day you'll walk without fear, carrying both our names with pride." The Apache looked up at the old soldier, his throat tight. "You kept this all these years." The man nodded. "I owed him that much." He looked at the boy and then back at the Apache. "What will you do now?" "I'll live," the Apache said. "That's what they wanted." The soldier tipped his hat. "Then maybe there's still hope for this land." When he rode away, the Apache folded the letter and tucked it beside the locket. The boy watched him silently. "He was your father, wasn't he?" "Yes," he said, his voice soft but sure. "And your uncle's brother? Which means somewhere you and I share the same blood." The boy smiled faintly. "Then I guess that makes us family." He nodded, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. Family isn't just who you're born to. It's who stands beside you when the fire comes. The days that followed passed gently. The boy grew stronger, and the Apache began to build a small shelter near the river. The land that had once seen war and sorrow now carried the sound of laughter again. Sometimes, they would find old wagon pieces buried in the dirt, remnants of a world that had once divided them. They used the wood to build instead of burn. When spring came, the valley bloomed. Wildflowers covered the hills, and the air smelled of rain and earth. The Apache stood one morning at the riverbank, watching the water move past the stones. He held the locket in his hand, opened it, and let the sunlight fall across it. "You're home now," he whispered. The boy ran up beside him, carrying a small carved hawk he'd made from driftwood. "I finished it," he said proudly. The Apache took it, smiling faintly. "It's good," he said. "It'll watch over us." He tied the carving to the branch of the cottonwood, where it swayed in the breeze, its wings catching the light as the sun rose higher. The two stood together, one born of the desert, the other of the plains, united by a truth stronger than the past. The wind carried the scent of life across the valley, and for the first time in many years, the land felt at peace. The Apache looked at the boy and smiled. "Let's go," he said. "There's work to do." And as they walked toward the rising light, leaving the shadows behind, the hawk above them seemed to spread its wings wide, soaring into the clear blue sky.